that this morning.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Mind meld. So good. Well, we are going to dive back in to David's life and to this story. We'll give you a quick catch up in just a minute. We are in 2 Samuel 6. Today, if you're kind of keeping track, today is the climax of the story. So the point at which really our question is what could happen from here. There's multiple options. And this story is probably a little different, right? Because you probably have never read or studied this passage before. You genuinely don't know what happens next. So as you're working on it, we're going to ask for your feedback. We're going to ask for you to comment along with us. And then we're actually going to also at the end ask for your perspective in what are the possibilities from here as we continue our study together. Susie dropping. I was wondering if somebody was going to catch me for not giving mine. I'm always a little torn because I'm like, oh, it's 8:07. That's kind of when I try to make the move. So I think my mom, like, I don't know that it was specific, like a tangible nugget of advice, but I think the thing that was more caught than taught for me with my mom was to be a lifelong learner, which might sound pretty trite, but like for me, learning is really difficult, especially when I was young, dyslexia, reading disability, learning disability. It would have been really easy to just kind of hang it up. But I think I just watched my mom struggle and fight through and figure it out and keep being a learner. And so I think even to today, it's made me see the value and not turning it off and continuing to understand, continuing to seek to understand and dig into more stuff. And so I think it was a big game changer for me.
That's good.
All right, Lisa, you want to pray for us? We get started?
God, we once again come to you and we thank you that we can be together. We thank you for this platform and this opportunity to study your word and to learn and to grow and have that learner's mindset. God, I pray that you would open our minds and our hearts today. Even what we think we know, I pray that you would speak wisdom into our hearts. God, help us to navigate through the words that are written, not only to understand what was happening then, but what that means for us today. God, give us the right words and just a heart to pursue you. We love you and pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. All right. We got some more during your prayer.
They weren't praying.
Yeah, it's okay. It's fine. Not a big deal. Jennifer says, follow up. I have to thank you all for prayers for my conversations with Bill's girlfriend. It went so well. And we were both so thankful to have a real and open discussion. We decided to sit over an hour of coffee on a regular basis because it was awesome. That's fantastic. That's so cool. Look at that. Carrie said, your mom sounds pretty awesome, Phil. She is pretty awesome. Agreed. She's a little spunky too. So if you're wondering, like, where does Phil get that sass from? My mom, 1000%. I'm like tame actually compared to my mom. My mom always told me to not make bad decisions based out of fear. Yeah. Or not to make decisions based out of fear. Those are going to be bad decisions. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right. So Lisa, if somebody's just joining us today, diving in, how can we catch them up?
Yeah. So we've been learning about David, who, when we first started, he had been chosen as the second king of Israel, but Saul was the current first king that the people had begged God for, even though God was like, I really want to be your king. And they were like, actually, we want a man king. And so God gave them Saul. Saul was not amazing. And so God was like, hey, I gave you what you wanted. It's not really working out so well. So we're gonna not have Saul be the king eventually, and we're gonna have this guy David, who God describes as a man after his own heart, after God's own heart. And so we kind of went through some of the tensions between Saul and David. Saul was loving and kind to him sometimes. David ended up being his son-in-law. David was best friends with one of Saul's sons. But then we saw another side of Saul where he was not kind and was out to not just get David, but to kill David. He saw him as a threat. And so where we picked up right here, Saul has died. He actually killed himself in battle. Jonathan, David's friend, has also died. Michal, who was David's wife, that was Saul's daughter, has been given away to another man, even when they were married, because David was hiding. And now she's back with David. we're going to see her come back into the story tomorrow. But David is trying to bring this ark, which is a chest that the Israelites believed contained God's presence. And so although we have God with us all the time through the Holy Spirit, it was just kind of a different relationship in this time. And so David rightfully thought it would be good to move the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem where he was. And what happened on yesterday is that they kind of cut some corners when they were moving it. And rather than following God's instructions, they were moving it in a different way. And that caused God to be angry. But then in the process of moving it, it almost fell. And so Uzzah reached out to steady the cart that it was being moved on. And out of God's anger, he was struck down dead, which caused David to be very angry. And so when we left off yesterday, the ark was left at another man's house, Obed-Edom. And God actually blessed this man and his household by housing the Ark of the Covenant there. And so we left David angry and scared. And we see God's blessing with Obed-Edom and his household.
Nice. Very good. Excellent job. So that's, really first in this point to 2 Samuel in just a couple minutes. So hopefully that's helpful. There you go. Just a chance to check it out. Good morning, Leslie. Good to see you. Cassie's got a piece of advice for us. She said, best advice is never make a big change within the year after losing someone. That's good advice. Yeah. And Leslie said, my advice was don't let others define your happiness. It's good. All right. So I'm going to read this portion of it, kind of the climax of the story. The ark has been with Obed-Edom. And this is not like for a small period of time. This is months that it's been with him. And so we pick up here. You can bold some stuff that we want to dig into, Lise. And then as you guys are watching this, drop in comments, questions, observations, all that stuff in the chat. And it was told King David, the Lord has blessed the household of Obed-Edom and all that belongs to him because of the ark of God. So David went and brought up the ark of God from the house of Obed-Edom to the city of David with rejoicing. And when those who bore the ark of the Lord had gone 6 steps, he sacrificed an ox and a fattened animal. And David danced before the Lord with all his might. And David was wearing a linen ephod. So David and all the house of Israel brought up the ark of the Lord with shouting and with the sound of the horn. So this is an interesting point in the story because the contrasts really couldn't be any more stark, right? Like we talked about this yesterday when we watched the ark get moved the first time. It was on this cart, shouldn't have been on a cart. It was done pretty haphazardly, which when we're reading it yesterday, you don't necessarily get a full picture of. But today we get to see some of the things that show that as specific kind of called out stuff. So we're going to take a look at that. So we'll do that in just a minute. Becky, thanks for this prayer request. Yeah. I'm going to drop that into the document right now, actually. Becky just asked for a prayer question. A close relative, Richard, was diagnosed with widespread bone cancer yesterday. Unsure of treatment options or time left. I'm worried about him for many reasons, but the main reason is he lost his faith many years ago. Oof. Absolutely praying for Richard. That is, man, I hate cancer. All right. So as we dig into these verses, Lisa, what are some things that kind of stand out to you specifically when we look at kind of the first couple verses here?
Yeah. Well, I didn't put this in here, and that's a miss on my part. But if you, after we finish here today, if you want to do a little more digging into what was going on behind the scenes here, 1 Chronicles 15 is going to paint a deeper picture of what we've got going on here. So I apologize for that. But it gives a little more context and it helps you understand what we're not reading here. So sorry about that. But some of the things that I noticed is David's told what was going on. So it's almost like he had, I don't want to say moved on, But it's not like he was having daily check-ins on, hey, what's going on with the ark? Like, did they
Is it
touch
killing
it? Are
anybody
they still
today?
alive?
No.
Are they okay? You know, it was like, hey, I'm doing king things here, and hopefully that guy and his family are okay. And so 3 months later, they're like, hey, things are going really well for this guy. Like, do we want to try again? And so David, obviously he's like, yes, except this time we're going to do it right. We're going to slow down. We're going to follow the rules. And we're going to make sure that we are praising God and celebrating and honoring him with the reverence that he deserves by the way that we transport the ark. So, like, I love that there's this yesterday and then there's today. I was telling Phil, I was like, today people won't think I'm an animal because I said this was one of my favorite stories, and yesterday it didn't seem like it should be a favorite story.
We were like, feels weird. Somebody got killed, but yeah.
So I love that they went back and they recognized what had gone wrong the first time, and we don't see it necessarily here, but there had to have been some kind of ownership, like, hey, even though that cart was nice and it was built for this event, it's not the way that God had designed his ark to be transported. And so David went back and remembered, we need to find the poles, and we need to find the ringlets, and we need to find the guys whose shoulders this is supposed to be carried on. That's how the ark was to be transported.
Right. Well, and I just love, like, at the top of this, to your point, like at some point, whether because it doesn't say even David went and asked. It's like somebody came to him and was like, hey, have you heard that the entire household of Obed-Edom is like crushing it, like doing so well? God keeps blessing them because they have the ark. Isn't that great? And David's like, let's get the ark over here now. Like, I'm ready. I think
I'm ready for some of that blessing.
Like, let's spread that blessing out for a minute, And so I just love that that's the picture. Like, there's no shame to it. David's like, all right, I think I know how to do it this time where somebody doesn't get killed. Let's try it again. And so this time we see a massive change, right? Of bringing it from Obed-Edom to the city of David, everybody's celebrating. And this is where we see the changes, right? This is where we see the things that make it very, very different than the first time. So a couple things that we see right off the bat, right? Peggy asked, are the 6 steps significant? It feels pretty specific. They are specific, actually. That's great. And actually not just those 6 steps, but I think it's Sarah this week. What's up, Sarah? Hey, speaking of Sarah, good morning. Good to see you. Sarah this week has been asking, hey, is part of the problem that Uzzah wasn't a priest? Like, we don't totally know, but the commentators that I was reading, kind of getting ready for our time this morning, were basically saying, like, we don't think that he was, or at least like wasn't what he needed to be, because there are some things that he didn't do that a priest would have done. And so this specific call out that Lisa's bolded, those who bore the ark of the Lord, that specific framing is that basically it's a call out that they actually, it's the group of people that are supposed to do this. Like that's the specific call out. And then one of the reasons that we know that is the way that this is described. So they've gone 6 steps, literally 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's not a euphemism. That's not a metaphor. Like, they would go 6 steps. And then basically the custom was, hey, as a way of honoring God, like a Sabbath, right? On the 7th day, God rested. The 7th step, they would stop and they would make a very, very valuable sacrifice. So you hear about small sacrifices. You hear about sacrifices that are pretty, customary for them. Sacrificing an ox and a fattened animal. These were animals that were prepared to be sacrificed in this way for a long time. So it was like, wait, we have to sacrifice animals after 6 steps. So all of a sudden now, when we look back at what we saw yesterday, you see a lot different lens through which we look, and it's like, oh, David was cutting a whole lot of corners, and so now there's just lots of I's being dotted and T's being crossed. Like, let's make sure they're ready. All right, everybody, let's take our 6 steps. all right, now let's do the sacrifices. Everybody wearing the right stuff. We got the right people holding the rods, like, or we're all on the same page.
Yep.
And that I think
And yesterday, the ox is what stumbled,
right,
carrying the cart that the ark should never have been on. Today, we see the ox being prepared for sacrifice the way that it should have been.
Yes, yes, yeah, absolutely. Dom said, wonder if Obed tried to talk David into keeping the ark given all the blessing he had received. Dude, why rock the boat here? I mean,
God likes it here.
Yeah, probably not. My guess is that David sent somebody else and was like, hey, FYI, Amazon Prime showing up tomorrow. We're taking the ark. I hope you've enjoyed these months. And then Crystal said, my study Bible notes that David was waiting to see if the Lord would allow him to bring it to Jerusalem. The fact that God blessed the home of Obed-Edom was a sign to David that he could try once again to move the ark. I mean, could be. I don't know that we necessarily see that in the text, but that is, ascribing like that absolutely could have been what David was waiting for. So we see all this getting crafted, 6 steps, specific group of people moving the ark this time, kind of the presence of God uniquely contained. And then it says this interesting thing: David danced before the Lord with all his might, and that he was wearing a linen ephod. And it's just an interesting call out, because if you don't know David very much, like, this actually isn't a profoundly unique thing for David. You want to talk about this a little bit, Lisa?
Well, I mean, David was a worshiper. Like, if you do a pretty extensive study on David, you're going to see that he worships with his whole body, with his whole might. And he gets lost in worship, which is one of the things that I just appreciate about him. And I mean, here, David, he's no longer a shepherd boy. He's no longer a warrior. He's no longer on the run. He is the king of Israel. And he doesn't let that position prevent him from worshiping God with everything that he has. I mean, he is so overwhelmed, I'm sure, with appreciation, with relief, with praise, just like, God, like, we're doing it. We're moving. You're coming with me. And for someone who just loved God so much, like, you can feel a little bit of what he was doing when he was worshiping. I mean, he wasn't just kind of like this thing. I mean, he was dancing. Like, I'm sure his knees were way up in the air. He was setting the tone of celebration.
And I think, we see with David, he experiences big emotions, right? Big happiness, big sadness, big anger, like all of it. And so we see David and this is so different than what they had seen with Saul, right? Because Saul was so consumed by appearances, by posturing. And so here you have David modeling such a different approach, where he's like, hey guys, I'm all in. Like, I'm a worshiper of God. And I think that is so incredibly important to be able to see. And this clothing that he's wearing, what's interesting, I dropped a note in here, I think, maybe. Yeah, I did. I dropped a note in here. That piece of clothing is a special linen. It's actually a ritual linen for priests to wear. And so there are some commentators that are like, did David get priestly status at some point? We don't see it in the text, but like, he could have. Which would be an interesting wrinkle to the story. But all this is, I mean, he is just going all for it, right? He's dancing before the Lord with all of his might, wearing this special deal. Like, this is a totally different deal. The first one was for efficiency. This one is for obedience. Like, it is a completely different experience than the first time that we saw this. Dom asked the question, was this every 6 steps? If so, sounds like a Snickers moment. We're going to be a while. No, this was only the first 6 steps. So you did it first 6 steps, stopped and offered the sacrifice, and then you could continue on with your way. Cassie said that's a lot of animals. Do we have an idea of the distance? It was 10 miles. So it was a while. That's
10 miles, but it was only that, like you said, it was only that first 6 steps.
Right. Yep.
It wasn't like every 6. I mean, can you imagine? That would have been.
Yeah. Oh, you're saying a lot of animals because that'd be a lot of sacrifices. No. Yeah, you just do that once, and then that'd be a very long journey. Very, very long journey. Yeah, and a lot of sacrifices. Like, that feels like it would get awkward. 6 steps
and messy.
You like we got to take big steps so that we're out of the clearance of where we just offered a sacrifice. Like, that'd be rough. Peggy said, I'm having a flashback. Is this the scene in the movie King David when David, Richard Gere, danced in the city? I don't know, actually. I have not seen that movie. Have you seen that movie?
No, I haven't, but I imagine, I mean, if it's about King David, I imagine that's this scene.
Could be, but it's not the only time he does it.
Nope.
So you see that several times in David's life. All right, so this is all happening, and then it says in verse 15, David and all the house of Israel brought up the ark with shouting and with the sound of the horn. Right, so everybody where the ark is going hears that it's coming. As it gets closer and closer and closer to the city of David, everybody's celebrating, right? Like it is this 10-mile party that's getting louder the further that it goes down. And bonus, no one's getting struck dead. So that is a massive contrast from where we were.
And you think about, you know, what does it say here? That all the house of Israel, in this First Chronicles passage, it says David assembled all Israel in Jerusalem. Thousands and thousands and thousands of people. I mean, it was a huge celebration.
Right. And again, one of those things that, like, for Saul, they had watched Saul basically kind of do it his own way at every step. And then they saw David start to do that, and it went really poorly. And I think there was probably a lot of redemption that came from a few months later. Hey, what's going to happen? And now they see it really like working out, and they see repentance from David. I think that there's probably a significant, we talked about this idea, these tensions for people that were like, oh no, have we made the same mistake twice, you know? And I think that this was such a clear difference of David worshiping, of David being obedient, of David recognizing the mistake his first time. So I think that's a big deal. Dom said not dying is a value add. Agreed. 100% agree. So that I mean, that's kind of where the climax ends, right? And it doesn't maybe feel like one because they're like, oh, that feels like the end of the story. Not the end of the story. So we got some stuff that's going to happen. So just wondering, you know, like we're going to ask the question, what are the possibilities from here? What could happen from here? So if you're watching this with us, just chat in the box what you think could take place next. And we're not trying to guess what does happen. So like reading ahead and being like, oh, this is what does happen, not as relevant, right? Today, what we really want to do when you study narrative is understand the potential possibilities as you think about what lots of different learnings could have been before tomorrow we dive into the lowering tension, lowering action, where we typically find the primary application of a narrative text. Yeah. So Lisa, as folks are commenting, what do you see as a possibility from here?
Yeah, well, I just wanted to add real quick what you were just saying. So I used to teach elementary school, and when I was teaching kids how to read a story, one of the things we would talk about all the time is that good readers are asking questions and good readers are making predictions. And so as I was thinking about what we were going to be doing today, I was like, that's exactly what we're doing. We're reading with the information that we have, and we're making predictions about what might happen next, based on what I've read, based on what I know, what might happen. So just a trait of a good reader.
Yep.
Just, free nugget. There you go.
Right. Teacher Lisa.
So one of the things that could happen is that everything is going to end up in Jerusalem. David's going to be receiving the same blessing that Obed-Edom had received, and just live a long, happy life.
So that's kind of the happily ever after version.
Yep.
Right. That's definitely, I mean, that is for sure what David's hoping for, like Obed, I need some of that blessing.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. I mean, it's like a fairy tale. It's a king. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I think there's also probably a way that after a short time, there is complacency in obedience, another compromise, and another judgment from God. That feels like very possible, given what we've seen, not only in Saul's leadership, but already in David's leadership. Leadership systems exist and they cross from one person, from one leader, from one man or woman to the next. Like it takes time to change that culture. And so I just think about like all those people that surrounded Saul, all those people that were involved, and all the like leadership complacency that they allowed to set in for Saul. A lot of those same people are still there, and they're like, "Oh, David, you can do whatever you want." And like we know that happens. Like we're in this next weekend, we're going to be talking about David and Bathsheba. Like this definitely happens. David has people around him that become yes men, and he gets away with stuff that ends up hurting him and other people too. Dom said, seems like Jerusalem becomes the center of worship for Israel, kind of like Germany reunified and the national capital returned to Berlin. Yeah, I think that's a very reasonable possibility, right? Because if we think about it, for Israel up to this point with Saul, Hebron had been kind of the center of the universe because that's where Saul was from. Yep. But now you see that kind of moving, and because of David's leadership, that there is an opportunity for that to be something that lasts way beyond him. Peggy, war at some point, unfortunately, that kind of always feels like it's a possibility in the life of Israel. Like there's somebody that comes after them, they get strong. God wants to teach them a lesson, right? It is an always present thing in the Hebrew scriptures. Jeanette, all the Israelites party down and dance and worship before the Lord, right? Spread the party, continue on. That could be the rest of our story tomorrow. That would definitely be some lowering tension for sure. And then Vicky said, I'm always nervous when big important things like this are happening. I know the travel isn't as long as the time traveling out of Egypt, but it is always possible there will be some trials along the way. And I mean, I think that it definitely, for us, we think about travel and it's pretty easy. Whether you're driving or you're flying or whatever, you can get from one place to another without a lot of cost or implications. We're going to see a little foreshadowing for you. We're going to see somebody tomorrow who is very frustrated by what they see with David. And I think part of it is the length of time he's been away because, he wasn't commuting. Like he had been gone for a long time. And then Sarah, crazy idea. David likes one of the ladies he's teaching with, but men danced with men and women with women. So that would have been that David, I'm confused. Teaching with men, danced with men, and women with women. So that would not have been as likely. I don't know what that means. Do you know what that means, Lisa?
No.
Okay.
Well, yeah. Maybe
if you want to
clarify. Yeah.
Sweet. All right. Leslie, Saul could come after the ark because he wants the blessing of the ark. Although he couldn't, because actually Saul at this point is dead. So he was in battle, saw that he was going to be captured, asked his armor bearer to basically take his life. His armor bearer is like, you're the king. I'm not going to do that. So then Saul falls on his own sword. So I don't, that one's, but someone else could, this is a time of leadership transition. And so I'm sure that whether it's somebody else within Israel or somebody from another competing nation, although there's some rep about like, if you get the ark and you're not supposed to have it, it doesn't usually come with blessing.
I don't think the Philistines were coming after it this time.
Right. Yeah. Cassie, some of the things that could have happened is someone could touch the ark again, or even someone could steal it. War could happen over the ark. Dom said, not to divert, is there anything mentioned about what happened to his wife, Abigail? Not in this story, but yes, we learned more about Abigail for sure. And unfortunately, not his only wife, and also creates some problems. So,
like I said, he's a wife collector. I don't know what to tell you.
It's a bad. Remember what we keep saying it. The Hebrew scriptures are descriptive, not always prescriptive. So, God.
Well, and we will learn over and over again that collecting wives does not end well.
It's a bad idea. It's a bad idea. Just don't do it. Don't do it. Let's see here. Vicky said, I'm always a little nervous. Oh, no, I don't know why it's repeating.
I know, it's being weird today.
It's like repeating a bunch of them. Made a correction from teaching to dancing, and Facebook is running slow. Got it. I still don't understand.
So I don't know that he's dancing with anybody. I think, we have this picture of what dancing looks like. I imagine it almost more like a parade where he is kind of by himself. I mean, there are people dancing around him, but David's just on his own. You think of that like crazy guy that you see at the wedding that's just kind of doing his own thing. Well, actually, in my case, it's usually me, but just kind of doing his own thing and just having a great time. He wasn't dancing with people. He was dancing around people, but not dancing with. So
Right.
it's just different.
Yeah, I think that's true. Especially for him, he's going to be kind of like out front of almost like a processional. Vicky said that she spelled there wrong, so she's sorry to you as a teacher.
I did notice. I did not notice.
Look at that. I promise you I did not notice. So
Phil did not notice. Yeah.
I did not notice. You're lucky I could read it. So those are good, right? Those are helpful for us to be able to kind of take a step back and go lots of different opportunities, lots of different potential when we take a step back and we look at this moment in the story. And unfortunately, all of us, this is true because this is an event, not a fairy tale. All of us have stuff that's baggage that comes up into the future. And so what we're going to see tomorrow is that really the hard part of this story has nothing to do with this. Like David is doing this well, but because of the baggage of what he hasn't done well, some stuff that he's left undone, some past pain, it ends up hurting him and really setting the stage for something worse down the road. All right, so those are helpful as we think about it. We know that tomorrow is going to be kind of primary application window, but let's take just a minute and talk about kind of what we're thinking about and how we are considering application from the text so far. So you can put that in there. Eileen, we got a couple questions in here. Crystal, wasn't Solomon David's son? He was like father, like son in taking more and more wives. Makes me wonder what shameful thing I learned from my parents and carry on. I mean, I definitely think there was also within the Hebrew scriptures, we see this principle show up of generational curses, right? That like what happens in one generation gets passed down from generation to generation. And I think that there is still ways that can happen biologically or ways that can happen just in terms of like setting patterns and habits. I do not believe that generational curses are still a thing today the way that they were in the Old Testament because of Jesus. Like he broke the back of that stuff. So just for whatever it's worth. But yes, Solomon goes from bad to worse, wisest man to ever lived. God's like, hey, just FYI, one thing, like, kind of don't do the wife thing. Like just be careful, be really smart about that. And he's like, did you say have 1,000 women? Because I'm gonna have 1,000 women.
I'm gonna do that. Like you had like 4 or 5. Like I think I'll significantly increase that.
Ridiculous.
The other thing that we're going to see is going to start in this weekend's message, and then you and I are going to discuss it a little more in detail next week. But David starts to abdicate his responsibilities as a father, and that is not going to lead his children well. And so we're going to see kind of the ramifications of what that starts to look like. And then if you start reading anything about Solomon, you'll see didn't go well for him either.
Did not go well. Eileen said, I'm wondering how God felt that David doesn't want the ark after he strikes Uzzah down, but then wants it back after he hears about all the blessings. Like, does David want God or for his blessings? I mean, it definitely makes you think, right? Like he's not interested in the ark until he hears that blessings are poured down. Now, it sounds like that study Bible that somebody mentioned, they're giving David the benefit of the doubt to say like he was just waiting for an indication that it was okay to bring it in. And the indication was it was okay because of the blessing. I think that's definitely possible. I think it's also possible that David is, he has inner turmoil and he's like, because the thing is, it's not just like, hey, I want blessings, so God give it to me. It's also like, I don't want people to be killed in front of me, right? Like
well, and I was looking in this First Chronicles 15. David is talking to the Levites, so the priests, and he says, it was because of you, the Levites, that it did not bring up the ark well the first time that God broke out in anger against us. And then he does say, we did not inquire of the Lord about how to do it the prescribed way. But it's almost like, hey, this is actually your fault. So you need to make sure this goes well the second time. So there's almost still this like, I don't want to fully own what was going on here.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of blame shifting for
As I was
sure.
pointing, I was very aware of the three fingers right back
That's
at me.
right. Look at that. Look at that. Peggy said, so thankful we're no longer under generational curses. Very, very thankful for that. Sarah, choose your teachers well. That is absolutely a lesson to learn from this, right? What does it look like for us to make sure that the people we're listening to, the people that we're learning from, are telling us the truth? And I think, unfortunately, it's easy to get wrapped up in them. We talked about this even when we were doing our week on Bible study, right? It's easy to get wrapped up in that sounds good, that sounds insightful. I don't know that I could get to it on my own. This person's so much smarter than me. I could never figure this out on my own. Be careful when those are your observations, because the Bible should be understandable. You should be able to learn and understand it more and more. And if it's like, oh, we just took a massive left turn, like, I don't know how to get to that, like, it's probably because we took the wrong turn. So Cassie said, what I apply to this is just because something doesn't work out the first time doesn't mean it's not meant to be or happen. Maybe it is the right thing at the wrong time. Like you were saying, Phil, right thing at the wrong time is the wrong thing. I've heard that somewhere. Absolutely. Right. What does it mean for us to be patient? Just because we want it right now doesn't mean God wants us to have it right now. There may be learning we need to do before we get it. Gloria said maybe at first David felt he was already favored by God. Sharing is caring. That's funny. Crystal, I wonder, are generational curses still a thing for non-believing families? People who clearly do not have the Holy Spirit wreak a lot of havoc on their kids. But yeah, that is an interesting question. So there are two types of grace. We've talked about this before. There's the grace that Jesus offers to Christians, right? This unique, special, saving grace that changes a whole lot of things for us. But there's also this general grace that God has given to the world through Jesus. So like there's actually there's a blessing for the whole planet that has been flowed out. And so there are some people that think, to your point, that for non-believers, they actually still have those generational curses. I don't think that. So I think that this is actually a part of the grace that God has given. Now, that doesn't mean that messed up families don't do damage, right? Like my dad, God bless him, God rest his soul. Like there was a lot of damage that was done to me as a little boy who like was a Christian, right? And there were plenty of those patterns and thought patterns that I had to like still work through. It wasn't necessarily generational cursing. Because when you look at it, right, we say it oftentimes as like this abstract idea of like one generation can influence the next generation. Of course, that's true. But generational curses, when you look at them in the Old Testament, these are like legit curses that had to be broken that went on for 6 or 7 generations. So when you look at it today and you go like, well, how can like this person be so different? You know, people would probably say that in our family, right? They would look like, hey, looking at my dad and the way that he lived his life and the way that he cared for his kids as they were young. And then you look at the way we live our lives today and the way that I care for our kids today. I don't have that same generational curse to battle with, but it doesn't mean that there wasn't any impact. I don't want to minimize impact, trauma, or pain from one generation to another. We all have that. Right. I think counseling should just be required for all humans. So
parents will influence their children. Like
right.
That is just a thing. Whether we like it or not, it is true. And then we can change that. We can pivot. We can shift course. And I know a lot of very resilient people who have been influenced by their parents, and that is absolutely a part of their story, but they have gone a different way.
Right. So, well, and I think, you know, what we see that's always so crazy. I know I did family ministry and student ministry for a lot of years. And, you know, the thing that always comes back, it's always come back, even now where kids are like, I don't give a crap about my parents, is that parents and primary caregivers are the number one influence of kids. It's never changed. And I think that is a God ordained reality. But it can be for the good and it can be for the bad. And so Liz said, my thought is that generational sin exists as sin patterns repeat in families. I'm seeing it and living it with my extended family. I don't think it's a curse, but I think there are repeated patterns passed down. My application would be, how can I break the patterns of generational sin in my family and make different choices than others? Absolutely. And I think, whether we talk about that at a brain chemistry level of like neural pathways, or we just look at it as, hey, primary influencers in my life have shown me that this is the way that it is. And I think all of us at some point, I think a lot of times it ends up in college. You end up in whatever college situation you're in, and you kind of realize the unique crazy that is your family, because you're around other family systems and you're like, oh, I thought my family system was normal. And now I'm realizing that not only was my family system not normal, but that like normal probably isn't as much of a thing as I thought that it was. There's not like this ideal, if I could just have this, I would have the perfect family. So I think that is a thoughtful perspective, Elizabeth. It's good. Any application for you out of this today, Lisa?
Mm-hmm. One of the things that that I love about this is this idea that obedience equals freedom, and so we see that in David's obedience, in the Israelites' obedience to the way that the ark needed to be moved, we see this freedom and this ability to celebrate. And when you talk about dancing with all your might, like that is a dance of freedom.
Absolutely. I think that's a great perspective too, because I think sometimes there's this idea that the more we try to walk with God, the more we try to live for God, especially as we begin to follow God, it feels sometimes very restrictive. And it's like, I remember when I was a kid, the kids that like got really serious were like, hey, I'm going to burn my CDs today, and it was like this weird, like, I don't know. And anyway, but I think
I lost a lot of CDs that way.
Right. Yeah. I think what we see with David is like this increased freedom to be who he is, to pursue God with all that he has, the closer and closer he walks with him. And I think that's true for us as well. Where did it go? Jeanette commenting on Liz said, the more we surrender to Jesus, the more he can transform us and our kids. Absolutely. Absolutely. Jennifer, Phil, your story sounds so much like my dad. My dad is an amazing dad, grandpa, and husband. He always said he learned everything not to do as a child. He calls it a weird kind of blessing. We were certainly blessed by his decisions. I'm so glad that it worked that way for you. That's awesome. Dom, I don't get the sense that David ran the idea to get the ark past members of his closest circle. So for me, am I accountable to anyone to ensure that I don't drive off the cliff or lose my focus? I hope that David's motivation was to intensify and focus Israel's worship on God, not transfer worship from God to the ark. Yeah, I do think that we're going to see that. Unfortunately, I would say this is a repeated pattern in David's life. We see him make good decisions independently sometimes, and we see him make bad decisions independently sometimes. But even his closest friends, we're going to see this with Nathan. We've already seen it with Jonathan. Sometimes they have to kind of like pound down the door to be able to get through to David. And so for us to be able to recognize, like, that's some of where I'll talk about actually this weekend, is who do we have in our life that is close enough to us that when they give us, the jaw shot to our soul that we don't want, we can still go, you know what? I didn't like this. I wouldn't have signed up for this, but I needed this. So, and then Jennifer, what I meant to finish with is that this sounds like you do the same thing. Your family is beyond blessed by your learning what not to do. I see. Yeah. I think there's, I think for all of us, we either follow a legacy that we continue, or we're beginning a new one. And I think in some respects for my family, I get to do both, right? With my dad, I'm starting a new legacy. With my mom, I'm continuing a legacy of faith that really she reached backwards and forward. She grew up Jewish, became a follower of Jesus, watched her mom become a Christian before she had passed away because of her relationship with her, and then leaned forward and obviously changed a generation with me as well. So it's a unique blessing that I am very, very thankful for. So as we think about the kind of perspective of what we do here, hopefully you can begin to see the contrast of the lessons that David is learning, the lessons that you and I can learn, and the place that we go from here. Tomorrow, we will look at some of that baggage that David is still carrying and how it comes back up. We'll talk about maybe ways that we can be thinking about that in our own lives What are those people? Who are those people that we need to reach back out to? What are those conversations that we put a pin in? What are those things that we hoped would just kind of go away, but we knew really wouldn't? Those are going to be some hopefully helpful conversations tomorrow. But before we head out, I just want to remind you guys about For Aurora. Today is Wednesday, which means tomorrow we will have Marketplace, serving thousands of pounds of food and supplies and hundreds of meals to people every single week because of your involvement. If you need help, know someone who needs help, or want to help, please reach out either on social media or via email. We would love to try to make whatever resources available that we can. Thanks to Debbie and Kendall and the teams that are making all that go. It's amazing to watch. So it'll be interesting this week. It's in a different room this week, so I'm curious to see how all the mechanics of that work. All right, any parting thoughts, Lisa?
I don't think so. Like I said, I would encourage you to read in 1 Chronicles 15 just to get a little more perspective. Because tomorrow we're really going to take a turn that I know when I was reading this the first time, I did not see that coming.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. I'm curious, like, I think we see each